How do you know that you are in God's plan right now? And this is a prominent question that I've asked myself plenty of times over about the decade that I've been a follower of Christ. And a lot of people even ask me of just like confusion when it comes to this and stuff. And a lot of times people can have a lot of anxiety when it comes to this, factoring every single decision that they ever make. And just to kind of break it down to make something really simple, just how to navigate this question and this issue, if you really want your life to honor God, it really comes down to two things. It comes down to intimacy and intentionality. And when I say intimacy, it's not meaning like lovey-dovey type of stuff and every else thing else like that, like romantic, whatever. Like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Think of it like this. Let's say you have a best friend, or maybe you're best friends with your parents, or whatever the case is, right? Technically, that's an intimate relationship because you know things about that person that not many people do know about. And for instance, here's an example. Let's say you're in a room with a lot of different people that you don't know, right? And let's say that friend or person who you're intimate with is like really there, but you're not with each other at that point. Like you're not right next to them. And then all the noise is kind of going out around and you're not really distinguishing like what's really going on in each of these conversations. It just looks like noise to you. But then you hear their voice. You can hear them speak whenever they call out your name or whenever they say something. Like you can tell that it's them because you know what their voice actually sounds like and you can distinguish it amongst all the noise because the rest seems like noise to you. But once you hear that voice, then you're like, oh, I know who that is. You can easily distinguish it because the same thing, that's what our brains tend to do with whenever we hear or we see something that's very important to us. It always distinguishes that from all the noise that we're kind of having. Because if we were to kind of like hear every single conversation going on at the same time, we would kind of have our brains a little fried at the moment. So our brain kind of like decides to dull everything out and leave the important things to actually be noticed. That's just a little psychology thing. But apart from that, intimacy with a friendship, intimacy, let's say, with a partner or even a parent at that point, you get to know who they really are. And you have this kind of connection with them where you know who they are. You know, you can kind of get to the point where you can assume what they do, right? Because at that point, you know who they are. You know typically how they think and everything. So you're just like, oh, okay. Me with my fiance, I know that she wants to have some takeout, right? Whenever she's like, oh, I'm so hungry, and it's like, I think she's in a Chinese mood right now, right? Don't know why. I just known her for so long. Then at that point, I'm just like, are you in a Chinese mood? And she's like, how did you know? I don't know. Maybe I just got it right. Who knows? But it's because I'm actually intimate with her. And it's the same thing when it comes to our relationship with God. Because, for instance, there's a lot of noise out here: social media, YouTube, music, podcasts, news, all this jazz from all the screens that we could ever do. And a lot of times we're filling our head with so much noise and so much, sometimes productive noise, sometimes just casual noise, entertainment, whatever the case is. That a lot of times we don't really get to hear God's voice. And the way we get to hear his voice is really becoming intimate with him. And because at that point, he can break through all the noise because our mind and our soul understands like he is the most important thing for us. Because if we're surrendering our lives to God, then he is the most important thing for us. And at that point, his voice should cut through all the noise. But a lot of times, he tends to whisper like a gentleman, and he doesn't yell till it gets too rough. And it really comes down to the point of like having this intimacy with him. And that's where you get to know like what his plan actually is for you. Because when it comes to making decisions, once you know what God's character looks like, you know what he tends to think about certain situations. Like, for instance, sins are the things that God disapproves of. You know not to touch those things. Everyone does once you understand what those are. Then you know the things that are pleasing to God, which are things that doing the things that he told us to do, you know, giving to the people who need it, right? Serving others, loving them as we love ourselves, loving God with everything in our being and everything like that. Then there's things in the middle, right? Which could be what the heck you're going to eat for dinner at that point. And I've gotten to the point where I was really anxious about this question of how do I stay in God's plan, to where I was like, okay, God, where should I go to eat dinner? What should I eat? What kind of chips should I have? Da, da, da. Like, as anal as that, literally. And I was just so anxious because I was like, no, I need to stop staying in God's plan and everything like that. But now, after so many years after that, I've just came to the realization of just like, listen, God gave you and me free will, and He wants us to choose Him ultimately, to surrender our free will to allow His to reign in our lives. And that's the main thing. And now there are things that He's explicitly going to tell us to do, and we should do it through His word or even just through us directly, right? Then there's things He's telling us not to do, and we shouldn't do those, right? Because we want to please God at the end of the day. And then there's things in the middle. And at those things, like, He still gave us a mind, He still gave us a brain, right? And while He specifically might not tell you to specifically go to the gym on a Wednesday at 5 in the morning, we come to that our own decision. We have to choose, okay, this is anything is permissible within this area, but is it actually something that will push us towards what God is calling us to do? Because even Paul says it, everything is permissible, but that doesn't mean it's good for you, right? Eating junk food is permissible, right? It's fun, it's easy, it's delicious, and but the thing is, it's not great for you. Now, you can do that every so often, right? But then it comes to a point where, okay, I should probably stop because it's really bloating up my body and I'm not feeling really great and whatnot. And at that point, we're not really honoring as much our body as the temple of the Holy Spirit at that point. And it's permissible, but it's not the greatest decision that we could make. And that comes with discernment. But that comes with the kind of like the circle of what we could choose within our free will. And those decisions aren't against God. Those decisions aren't, against what He wants for us. But that's where the Holy Spirit kind of goes into our hearts and being like, starting to convict us a little bit, being like, hey, like whenever you ate, let's say, a piece of potato chips or whatever the case is, then you feel kind of terrible afterwards, and you're like, man, I shouldn't have done that. Maybe is it just the body talking, or is it also part of the Holy Spirit? He's just like, hey, that wasn't the smartest thing to do, and you've been doing this a lot, and I think we should raise that standard of what actually goes in your body. Because I know he's had that with me, and I'm paying attention more of what I've been eating and everything like that. I have my cheat days, of course, but being more aware of what I'm eating, because I know my health hasn't been the greatest so far, at least when it comes to blood tests and everything like that. So I'm definitely working on that, and it's those little minute things that where the Holy Spirit and God will literally start to convict you of just like, hey, why don't we make a different decision? While it's permissible, it may not be great. And those convictions start to add up onto things like, hey, this is what's actually pleasing God, and this is how you stay within His plan. But you'll only get there through intimacy. And then this actually leads me to the second thing, which is pretty much intentionality. And I'll say this because a lot of times, especially us as Americans, right? When it comes to us being in high school, making friends and having a best friend isn't exactly the hardest thing to do because you're in school 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, surrounded with the same people in your same age, in the same demographic, within the same area. And so, of course, you have so many things in common so that it's very easy to make friends over there for some people, right? And it's very easy to just like attach to people and everything like that. But once you leave that system where you're constantly being integrated with people who are like you and similar to you and similar demographics and everything, it becomes hard because guess what? You have to be intentional. The only way that you're going to keep up these relationships that you made in high school or make in general is if you be intentional. And that looks like making time for them, making time to reach out to them, making time to talk to them, catching up with them, having lunch, hangouts, whatever the case is. And then at a certain point, it gets to the place where maybe you guys can have an intimate conversation or maybe even grow a relationship, whether it could be romantically or whatever the case is, right? And when it comes to that, it's just like it's all based on intentionality. And a lot of times we expect with our relationship with God to for it to be similar to how we make friends in high school. That like, oh, whenever I'm at church, I'm just feel closer to God. But we're not always going to be at church. Unless you work at one, then sure, it makes it a little easier. But even at that point, it's just really forming a relationship with God, with Jesus, rather than just the church. because the church is the conduit for us to connect to Him at that point and have a fellow community of people who are also connected with Him and live out our lives with these people. But they're not Jesus, they're not God. And if we don't make the conscious effort to being intentional in our relationship with God and being sure to read His Word, to understand how He talks, to making sure to take the time out of our lives to just like, hey, I want to prioritize this to make sure that I give it to Him at that point, then we'll never get to the point where we have that intimacy that I was talking about earlier. Because if we're not intentional, like if I'm not intentional with my fiance, she probably would still be my girlfriend, or probably we wouldn't even be working out all the issues that we've had anyways because I wasn't intentional. Because I wasn't intentional enough to, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this major life issue? What do you think about this major life topic, right? That you do need to consider before getting married and everything like that. And if I don't talk about those things, sure, you could be physically intimate by having sex and all that jazz, which is the thing that I don't want to do. And that's just superficial at that point. But it doesn't really create relational intimacy with them, with her. Because at that point, it's just like, oh, this person's my girlfriend. That you can ask me whatever question you may think, and then I'm like, I don't really know the answer to that. And when someone kind of presses you, I'm just like, hey, like let's say if someone were to ask me about my fiance and I didn't know much about her or her convictions or her dreams or anything like that, and they were just like, hey, so what does she want to do? What's her drives? What's her passions? Like, what are the things that kind of make her get up in the morning and everything like that? And if I'm not intentional enough to actually ask those questions, and I literally say I don't really know, bro, I've been with this person for 4 years and I don't even know like what really them up in the morning. Like what kind of relationship is that? Like you didn't even choose to get to know them well enough to understand like what's the main reason why they want to get up in the morning, or what's their passions, or what do they like to do at the end of the day. And that just shows because like if someone presses you in your relationship with God, like what does He want for your life? And you're like, I don't know. Is that really just on God from being not clear with you, or is it on also on us that we're not intentional enough, that we haven't been? Because only you know, and only I know that. Hey, I know I haven't been intentional enough. I haven't been diving into my word. I haven't been choosing to pray. I haven't been choosing to go to God with my problems. I've been choosing to distract myself at the end of the day. And the way we actually become intentional and like the actions of what those look like to actually get to that intimacy that we're looking for, to make sure that we have that clarity for this question, is really, for instance, the only way that you'll finally know what God's voice sounds like is through typically three things. Actually, just two. It's through prayer. Well, actually, three things. I want to say that. It's through prayer, listening, and shutting up your mouth, but also reading His Word. Because I'll go backwards for it. When you're reading His Word, or when you're reading the Bible, clarity on that. You're understanding what He says. You're understanding how He talked to His people before, and you're understanding what the Holy Spirit's trying to tell you through everything that's happening in that has happened in there as well. And it's not like He's speaking to you with an audible voice, but for instance, think about it like if someone were to send you a text, it's not like you're just reading text, like you know whose it's coming from, and they're communicating with you. And that's the same way when we read the Bible. God's communicating with us, whether we understand it or not. But if we keep reading, there's going to be some things that kind of poke out to you, being like, whoa, I didn't know that. Whoa, that's kind of like, it makes me think that what I'm doing is shouldn't be right. That's the Holy Spirit. That's God talking at that point. Because if you read a book and then literally, if you just read a book and then it's telling you like, and you're actually feeling something inside where you're just like, I should probably start changing some things. That's not just the book. That's the Holy Spirit inside of the book. That's God as His word, speaking the living word right into your soul. And you're like, whoa, then if I treasure the God I say I treasure and I read His word and the thing convicts me, I ought to change my life. And that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is really, I'll say prayer. Because if you don't talk to God, if you don't send requests or whatever the case is, right? Have communication with him on a daily basis and actually just like not just make a routine out of it, but like it's a relationship at that point. How are you going to know what he's saying? And then along with that, it's not just praying and speaking to him, like, but making a two-way conversation where you just sit down and shut up and listen. Because at that point, like, God's definitely speaking. A lot of times he's speaking to you every single day, and even to me. Like, he's speaking to us every single day, but the thing is, we don't pay attention because we're too distracted by everything else. And that's the main issue. That's why we don't know whether or not we are in God's plan or not, because we're not sitting down, we're not being intentional. And a lot of times, maybe God's doing a silent season for you. Read the word and understand, like, definitely something will pop up to you or it will start to make sense for you at that point. And the reason why I just answered this question and like this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, at least for today, is really just because I know I've dealt a lot with this question myself. And I've had a lot of questions. I've had a lot of insecurities about this and everything like that. And now I have a lot more clarity on it. Like, for instance, this, like, the reason why I'm doing this video, because I say this every single time, is really just this is kind of my commitment to myself and my God. Because I know even just planning out the vision for this year, I asked him to cast a vision for this year. And this was one of the things that he wanted me to do, which was just be consistent and record the things that I have learned to cement it more in my mind, as well as being open with the experiences that I've been going through and like what I've been learning at that point and what I've been thinking too. So like can add value to other people, but also hold myself accountable at that point. And this is my commitment to him. And this is part of the plan that I know he wants me to do. And the only reason I got there is because I was being intentional. It's not because it's all me, right? God is God, right? But I did my part where it was like, hey, I decided no. I established a routine where I get closer to him every single morning, read his word and everything like that. And make sure not to treat it just like going through the motions, but do my best to just being like, no, I want to listen to you. I want to hear what you have to say and everything like that. And understanding what his voice sounds like through his word and through listening at the end of the day and having that intimate relationship with him. That's how I come to this conclusion. Not because I'm thinking about this and be like, oh, I heard one podcast and then, like that made me think I should do this right now because YouTube is the future or whatever. No, it's because I tried YouTube before. You could even look at this channel, really. And I tried that and that was mostly on my own and I got burnt out at the end of the day and I just didn't want to do it anymore. And right now, this is just like kind of the rekindling of me to actually be committed to this, committed to something like this when it comes to content or whatever the case is. And he's growing me. He's stretching me. He's making me more disciplined this year. And this is just for all of us to go along the journey. For you to, I guess, get some kind of reminders what I'm talking about and everything like that. And I kind of wanted to just structure this video at least just a little bit more structured than just me rambling all the time. I'll leave the rambling towards the end anyways, like I'm doing now. But yeah, this is just to add value at the end of the day. And if you're constantly still asking yourself the question, do I know if I'm in God's will or not? Just ask yourself these questions. Am I intimate with God right now? Have I been intimate with God? Do I have an intimate relationship with him? And have I been really intentional with understanding like who he is, what he wants for me, and what his goals are for my life and for everyone that follows him? Have I been intentional enough to understand what these things are? Ask yourself this. And if you honestly can't say yes to either one of them, congratulations, you did the hard part, which is being aware of it. Now, here's the simple part. Get in the word and read it. Pray to him. And that's just having an easy conversation with him. Being like, hey God, hi. I love you. Thank you. You are awesome. And I pray that you show me what you want me to do. Something as simple as that. Because he cherishes you at the end of the day. And he wants to be Lord of your life. Because something I've definitely known is that my life with his guidance and with his lordship over it is so much better than if I was just trying to do everything on my own. Because I'm not smart enough. I'm not wise enough. I'm not keen enough. I don't have enough skills to take control of my life. It's like, no, like, I'm just a human. And I'd rather submit my entire life to the good God that He's proven to me He is and allow Him to take control of my life. And that's not me becoming a slave, that's me becoming a servant at the end of the day. Because I gladly get to serve Him because He's good. And I've learned that He's good, been so good to me. And the things that He's been pushing me to do, yes, it's been uncomfortable. And yes, there's been times where I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. But at the end of the day, it's so much better that I did it because He knows a lot more than I do. And He proved it. He proves it time and time again. And so this is just a reminder. If you feel like you don't know if you're in God's will, ask yourself those questions. So I hope this helped you. Hope this added value to you. Like for the 10 people that are going to watch this, love you. Peace.